Good morning, ecotourism. This is our final. This is our ninth chapter here, change and innovation. Um, you know, to change or innovate, to understand the future, you can either project from your past trends or use scenarios. Um, and usually, scenarios don't account for disruptors. I'm pretty sure nobody predicted the globe pretty much shutting down for coronavirus. So that's definitely one huge disruptor. Some past trends. And we got to be careful. Again, if we look back next year on this year and try to take a trend from it, it's just not going to be quite right. Tourism, it's heavily reliant on discretionary income and time. Uh, we only have two things in this life to spend: time and money. And usually, when you got the money, you ain't got the time, and when you got the time, you don't have the money. So when we do have both, usually we're kind of choosy with how we spend that. It involves a complex supply and distribution chain. There are many different stakeholders at different levels, and of course, it's vulnerable to trends and events outside of its control. So, to understand change, there are two main types of change: there's the structural change, and then there's the temporary change. Right? The structural change can be gradual, and sometimes it's hard to recognize. Now, the temporary change we're going through right now, previous examples would be SARS, but we also tend to go through this in our southeast Georgia area with the random hurricane, which will disrupt things as well. If you fail to plan, obviously you're planning to fail, right? There are 5 areas where you might see structural change. Those are going to be social, several significant trends that have affected the growth of tourism in the past that will continue to affect growth in the future, starting with the social factors. We want to consider how changing demographics, uh, ethnic diversity, religion, and cultural factors might all influence tourism itself. Perhaps one of the demographic changes that has received the most attention is this notion of an aging population. Now, many people are living longer. The average life expectancy has gone from approximately, uh, has grown, sorry, about 10 years over from the last couple of generations. Meanwhile, families tend to be getting smaller, with parents having fewer children. These two trends combined mean fewer youth and more elderly people. Technology is another huge change that we have to deal with. Um, if you think back to just 10 years ago when the iPhone was first released, and to see where things have gone from since then, it's really quite amazing. Um, you know, the way internet is from when I first experienced it to now is just you couldn't explain it to a 10-year-old today. Um, Environmental changes, economic factors. Um, we know that economic growth in key markets has been a major driver of tourism development, but right now, we're going to be in a time where a lot of people are going to be cautious when they're coming back out and the global economy's starting back up. So it'll be interesting to watch how this plays out, but we've seen it before. This is not the first time, and it probably won't be the last. So the way that we have dealt with it before will help us determine how we get through this next couple months here. Political, which is also legal, so that can be a little bit of everything. If you look back to 9/11, pre 9/11, anybody and everybody could take you to each airport gate and everything else. It was a very laissez-faire type of situation. We would all go through security, but every last person who wanted to come see you off would. So I remember distinctly in 98, my parents sitting with me in the Minneapolis airport waiting for boarding to happen before I went off to join the Marine Corps. It was a whole different time. And then when I got out of the Marine Corps, it was completely different. Only the person who was traveling could go past security, nobody else. It really kind of changed the whole feel. It used to be that people would be at the gates waiting for you to get off the plane. And there was almost like an air of excitement when you would exit the tunnel from leaving the plane. So things have changed a lot. And, sometimes for the better, sometimes not as much. But the whole point is, anyways, innovation allows you to get ahead of change. The steep approach. So we got the social trends, right? The growing middle class in emerging economies. Technology, we've talked about the economy, ecology, right? The different emissions. Do yourself a favor, take a look at like what the pollution map looks like right now compared to like 3 months ago. It's amazing to watch. Political, such as changes in border regulations. Legal, such as completely changing the way that we interact at airports. So forth. There's a few ways of understanding change. You can forecast and business as usual approach. You can do scenario based. It offers the chance to explore more complex and uncertain futures by presenting alternative yet plausible type future scenarios. You can ask an expert, right? Rounds of experts consulting, consolidating, confirming of these ideas. It never hurts to ask somebody about their opinion. Do you rely solely on that? Maybe not, but a second opinion never hurts. So what are some disruptors? We talked about this a little bit earlier. A serious pandemic. Who knew, right? Travel is shut down. We're currently on a stay-at-home order, though if you go by the beach, it doesn't always seem that way. Where personal travel is risky and highly regulated to prevent further spread of a biohazard. There could be a regional conflict, right? That might disrupt the oil supply or just make it so that it's not safe to go travel to a certain region. Iceland had a volcano eruption that completely shut down air travel because all of the volcano ash was in the air and it could impact the airplanes. So when that happened, a company called Lonely Planet actually made for free at the time digital versions of their books on through their app, so that way people who were stuck in Europe could find other things to do since they couldn't fly home. Another one is abrupt climate change, right? That's going to lead to stricter emissions. Right now, the previous administration kept on making emissions regulations stricter, and it was showing progress. And we'll see what happens with the next administration. So Scott and Gosling compared global risk versus tourism risks for the next decade. So the preservation of nature in a destination despite pressure from tourists to use it, right? That was a challenge facing tourism in the next 20 years. The global risk is a financial crisis. That was the number one thing. But you can sit there and you can kind of look back and forth if you go to D2L and you look at the slides themselves, and you can see that not everything lines up, but there's some similar patterns to both the global risks and the risk to tourism, right? A crash in key economies would really decimate a lot of tourism because people would no longer be able to afford it. Innovation, it's a way to meet the challenges of the future, or is it, right? Is it just a buzzword? It can be defined as the implementation of organizational learning, new ideas, new processes, and products within an organization. It can be an indication of a firm's performance, the thing that ensures that the business keeps up with or ahead of societal trends. It is more commonly applied to products than services, but it can be in the form of imitation, right? Or incremental or discontinuous or to really new and radically innovative. It was radically innovative when we did a serpentine queue. Now it just is second nature that most businesses will have one, but it used to be just a small example. There's 4 different types: your products or services, new and observable to the customer, the process, right? How are things getting done? So when McDonald's decided to have all-day breakfast, they obviously had to change the process behind the scenes to accommodate the additional products during non-breakfast time, right? That's behind the scene. That's the back of the house. Your marketing. How do you communicate with your customers? And then, of course, managerial. That's just aimed at making sure that your staff is nice and satisfied. So usually with sustainability oriented innovations, it goes through one of 3 distinct aspects. It could be your resource driven. When resources are scarce or unaffordable for the small businesses or communities. It could be the socially driven or social mindedness, when there are equity concerns in small businesses or communities. And it could also just be environmentally driven, where there are concerns about the impact of businesses or lifestyles on the local natural environment itself. As you can see here in figure 9.7, there are the drivers of our sustainability oriented innovations, right? So sometimes we just have to use whatever we have available because the resources are constrained. That's going to be part of your resource driven innovation. It can improve the lives of the marginalized groups, which is empowerment, which is a socially driven innovation, right? Or it can help solve an issue of pollution or consumption, which is environmentally and the integrity concern, right? Now, Rogers identified 5 key attributes required for successful market diffusion of an innovation. What's the advantage? The status, compatibility, complexity, and triability, right? Now, innovations that are strong in these areas are more likely to be successful when diffused throughout the market. As people become aware of the innovation, are persuaded that the innovation offers them benefits, they will then decide to use it or not. And their attitudes towards innovation will be confirmed or disconfirmed. With this model and these stages and attributes and a range of other variables that contribute to the successful diffusion or of innovations into a marketplace, you have an innovation that you want to launch into the marketplace. Now, this model is an excellent starting point to evaluate whether your innovation has what it takes to be successful or not. Surprisingly, the inverse of the attributes that lead to a successful diffusion are not the same as those that will impede the success of an innovation. The literature suggests that there are no perceived added value to be derived from the innovation, or where it is perceived to be, if it's difficult to use, or if it just has a poor image, or its adoption might reflect badly on the image of the user. And there might be significant risks, such as your overall image, financial or otherwise, that could be associated with the adoption of the innovation. Innovations are most likely to fail regardless of the market for them. The market itself may be resistant to innovation, either through consumer inertia or individual resistance to change, personality characteristics that are associated with the general trust, agreeableness, openness to new experiences, as well as extroversion tend to be more associated with the adoption of innovations. And conversely, those who score lower on these traits tend to be more resistant to doing innovations. Finally, there may simply be behavioral constraints that impede the diffusion of it. People may have already invested in an alternative product or service and perceive the switching cost to be too high, or feel that there are sunk costs too great to allow them for new alternatives. There may be a lack of awareness of an innovation, and finally, habits may be very difficult to break. Adopting an innovation may simply go against the grain. So, technology can be used to enhance the tourist experience as well as collect data and help find ways to make the overall environmental aspect of it better as well. As we can see here, there's sometimes we use buzzwords and things like that. All of a sudden RFID was thrown out everywhere. Peer-to-peer, etc. Sometimes we use things such as these beacons, like in Amsterdam, that let tourist signs translate themselves into different languages. Sometimes it's proximity, such as in Brisbane, where they will, if you're within a certain area, it'll communicate information to you via an app if you're within a certain radius of a location. Another thing that is kind of a buzzy thing is VR and AR, right? Virtual reality and augmented reality. So augmented reality use the location devices, think Pokemon Go, right? Where you just hold up your phone and you can see things that are not there. A good example for tourism is when you hold it up, and there's always in development a Yelp type app where you hold it up down a street and you can see the reviews of the local businesses. Or if you're in a convention center, it'll give you pretty much the yellow brick road on how to get to wherever you need to go. Virtual reality is more of an immersive type thing where you get to sample the destination or place to kind of give yourself like a tour before you even get there, or a way to experience it prior to going, so you are a little bit more familiar with what to expect. There's a shared economy, that's the peer-to-peer accommodation. Airbnb is often provided as a case study for this, right? Where you have the space and you happen to live in a tourist hotspot, or you just happen to live somewhere where somebody might want to stay, and it helps you out that way. The shared economy tends to bring together online, mobile, and social aspects, media. Appeals to the search for authenticity and local encounters. Um, at least in its beginning, Airbnb was much more. It was kind of like couch surfing. There was a website about that where you could stay on people's couches based on whatever city you're going to, and if you live somewhere, you put your couch up for to be shared as well. Um, but now it's almost more corporate, where people will buy, a lot of apartments in a building and just turn them into Airbnbs. It used to be used for accommodations, transportation, meals. Transportation, think Uber, right? Is it safe, right? What's the quality control? Airbnb, there is a little quality control, but if you've stayed in some, you question how controlled is it. Another thing, um, there's a slow movement, right? Responds to fast pace in the modern living, applies to food, travel, cities, schools, money, right? It aims for the connection to be there, the well-being, a sense of community. Um, it puts bio regionalism versus globalization, and it's kind of neat. And I highly suggest that you read into it. Hopefully, you've read the chapter and have enjoyed this lecture. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. That's been it for chapter 9.